The desert air was thick with tension as Lieutenant Jake Morrison crouched behind a crumbling mud wall, his rifle pressed against his shoulder. The small village in Afghanistan had been quiet for the past 2 hours, too quiet for his liking. His team of 6 Navy SEALs had been tracking a high-value target for 3 weeks. An intelligence suggested the man they were after was hiding in one of the compounds. Just 50 meters ahead, Jake's earpiece crackled to life. It was his second-in-command, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Chen. Alpha 1, this is Alpha 2. We've got movement in the southwest corner. 2 armed hostiles on the rooftop. Jake scanned the area through his night vision goggles. The green glow revealing 2 figures moving slowly along the edge of a flat roof. They were armed with AK-47s, but their movements were lazy, unprofessional. These weren't trained soldiers. They were local militia, probably hired guns protecting someone important. Copy that, Alpha 2. Hold your position. We move on, my mark. Jake whispered into his mic. The mission had started 3 days ago, when Jake's team received orders from command. A Taliban commander named Rashid Durrani had been orchestrating attacks on coalition forces for months. He was responsible for the deaths of 12 American soldiers and countless Afghan civilians. Intelligence finally pinpointed his location to this remote village in Helmand province. But there was a twist to this mission. Durrani wasn't supposed to be killed. He needed to be captured alive. Command believed he had information about a larger network of insurgents. Planning a major attack on Kabul? Dead men don't talk. And the information in Durrani's head was worth more than his body in a grave. Jake had led dozens of missions during his 8 years as a SEAL, but capture missions were always more complicated than kill operations. You had to get close, neutralize the target without permanent harm, and extract him while keeping your own team safe. One wrong move and everything could go sideways. The village was a maze of narrow alleyways and compounds surrounded by high walls, perfect for ambushes. Jake had positioned his team strategically around the target building. Marcus and his partner, Petty Officer Luis Rodriguez, covered the west side. Petty Officers David Park and Anthony Rivers watched the east. The youngest member of the team, Petty Officer First Class Tyler Bennett, stayed with Jake. Tyler was 24 years old, fresh out of SEAL training, but sharp as a blade. This was his first major capture mission, and Jake could sense the nervous energy radiating from him. Jake had been in his position once, feeling that mix of excitement and fear before a critical operation. "You good, Bennett?" Jake asked quietly. Tyler nodded, gripping his rifle tighter. "Ready when you are, Lieutenant?" Jake checked his watch. It was 0 to 43 hours. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, providing excellent cover. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. "All units, prepare to breach on my signal. Remember, we need Durrani alive." "Positive ID before engagement," Jake commanded through the radio. The team acknowledged one by one. Jake's heart rate remained steady, a result of years of training and combat experience. Fear was natural, but control was everything. Suddenly, a dog barked somewhere in the village. Jake froze. The 2 guards on the rooftop became alert, scanning the darkness. One of them pulled out a radio and spoke into it. Within seconds, lights flickered on inside the compound. "They're going active." "We've been compromised," Marcus reported urgently. Jake's mind raced. They had 2 options: abort the mission and try again another night, or push forward now before Durrani could escape. Intelligence suggested this was their best window. Durrani rarely stayed in one place for more than 48 hours. "All units, execute breach protocol. Alpha 2, neutralize those rooftop guards. Non-lethal if possible," Jake ordered. Marcus didn't hesitate. 2 suppressed shots echoed softly through the night. Both guards dropped, hit with precision in their legs. They wouldn't die, but they wouldn't be fighting back either. Jake and Tyler moved swiftly toward the compound's main gate. It was a heavy wooden door reinforced with metal bars. Luis appeared from the shadows, carrying a small breaching charge. He placed it carefully on the hinges and stepped back, breaching in 3, 2, 1. Luis counted down. The explosion was controlled, but loud enough to wake anyone sleeping nearby. The door blew inward, and Jake's team poured into the compound. The courtyard was small, surrounded by rooms on 3 sides. Jake's eyes scanned every window, every doorway, looking for threats. Gunfire erupted from a second-floor window. Bullets kicked up dust at their feet. David returned fire, forcing the shooter back inside. The team moved like a well-oiled machine, covering each other as they advanced toward the main structure. Upstairs, second door on the right, that's where the thermal signature showed the target, Marcus called out. Referencing the intelligence they'd received from drone surveillance earlier, Jake led Tyler up a narrow staircase, their footsteps barely making a sound despite their heavy gear. At the top of the stairs, a hallway stretched out with 3 doors. Jake signaled for Tyler to watch their backs while he approached the second door. Before Jake could position himself, the door burst open and a man charged out with a knife. Jake reacted instantly, sidestepping the attack and slamming the man against the wall. The knife clattered to the floor. Jake had him in a chokehold within seconds, applying just enough pressure to render him unconscious without causing permanent damage. Target secured, Jake announced as he zip-tied the man's hands behind his back. But when Jake turned the man's face toward him, his stomach dropped. This wasn't Rashid Durrani. The face didn't match the photos they'd studied. This man was younger, possibly a bodyguard or a family member, negative on target ID. "This isn't our guy," Jake said into his radio. Marcus's voice came back immediately. "Lieutenant, we've got a problem. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north. Looks like reinforcements. We've got maybe 2 minutes before this place is swarming with hostiles." Jake's jaw clenched. They'd been set up. Either their intelligence was wrong, or Durrani had known they were coming and prepared a trap. "Search the other rooms, fast, if Durrani's here." "We find him now," Jake commanded. The team split up, kicking in doors and clearing rooms with practiced efficiency. Tyler found 2 women and 3 children huddled in one room, terrified but unharmed. David found a small weapons cache, but no additional fighters. Then Anthony's voice crackled through the radio. "I've got something. Basement level. There's a hidden door behind a rug in the southwest room." Jake rushed to Anthony's position. Sure enough, a trapdoor was concealed beneath a thick carpet. Jake pulled it open to reveal a ladder descending into darkness. "I'm going down. Cover the entrance," Jake said, switching on his weapon light. He climbed down into a narrow tunnel, barely wide enough for his shoulders. The air was stale and smelled of damp earth. After about 10 meters, the tunnel opened into a small underground room. And there, sitting calmly on a cushion, with his hands folded, was Rashid Durrani. The Taliban commander looked exactly like his photos. Thick black beard, cold dark eyes that showed no fear. He smiled slightly when he saw Jake. American soldier Durrani said in accented English, "You are very persistent." Jake kept his rifle trained on him. "Rashid Durrani, you're coming with us." Durrani laughed softly. "Am I your friends outside? They are surrounded." "My men are coming." "Any men?" "You will not leave this village alive." Jake heard the rumble of vehicles getting closer. Marcus's voice came through urgent and stressed. "Lieutenant, we've got at least 6 trucks pulling up. Armed fighters pouring out. We need to extract now." Jake grabbed Durrani by the arm and hauled him to his feet. "Move now." But as Jake pushed Durrani toward the ladder, the Taliban commander spoke again. "There is something you should know, Lieutenant. The information your commanders want, it is not in my head. It is in a place only I can take you. Kill me, capture me, it does not matter. You will learn nothing without my cooperation." Jake paused. This changed everything. If Durrani was telling the truth, they needed him not just alive but willing to talk. That was a completely different kind of mission. "We'll see about that," Jake said, shoving Durrani toward the ladder. They climbed back up to find the team preparing defensive positions. Through the windows, Jake could see dozens of armed men taking positions around the compound. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as the first shots were fired. "We're pinned down," Marcus said, his face grim. "No way we're fighting through that." Jake looked at Durrani, who stood calmly despite the chaos erupting around them. The Taliban commander seemed almost amused by the situation. "Call for extraction." "Get us a bird in the air now," Jake ordered. David was already on the satellite phone, speaking rapidly to command. "They're saying 20 minutes minimum. There's a sandstorm moving through the area, grounding most aircraft. 20 minutes might as well have been 20 hours. The compound walls were already taking heavy fire. It was only a matter of time before the insurgents organized a proper assault." Jake made a decision. "We hold this position until extraction arrives. Set up overlapping fields of fire. Use the heavy machine gun on the north wall. Bennett, you're on medical standby. If anyone gets hit, you patch them up fast." The battle began in earnest. Tracer rounds streaked through the night sky. Jake moved from position to position, directing his team's fire and conserving ammunition. Each SEAL was trained to make every shot count, and the bodies piling up outside the compound proved their skill. But numbers were against them. For every insurgent they dropped, 2 more seemed to take his place. Then Jake heard a sound that made his blood run cold. The distinctive whistle of an RPG. He barely had time to shout a warning before the rocket propelled. Grenades slammed into the compound's outer wall. The explosion shook the entire building, sending chunks of mud brick flying. When the dust cleared, Jake saw a gaping hole in their defensive perimeter. Insurgents immediately began pushing toward the breach. "Plug that gap," Jake shouted, running toward the hole with Tyler right behind him. They opened fire, cutting down the first wave of attackers. But more kept coming. Jake felt a bullet whiz past his head, so close he felt the heat. His training kept him focused. Panic was death. Discipline was survival. Luis tossed a grenade through the breach. The explosion bought them a few precious seconds. Marcus appeared with a metal storage trunk and shoved it into the hole, creating a makeshift barricade. "How long on that extract?" Jake yelled to David. 15 minutes. They're pushing through the storm." 15 minutes. Jake looked around at his team. They were all still in the fight, but ammunition was running low. He could see it in their practiced movements, the way they were rationing their shots. And through it all, Rashid Durrani sat against a wall, watching everything with those cold, calculating eyes. He wasn't trying to escape. He wasn't calling out to his men. He was simply observing, as if this were all part of some larger plan Jake couldn't yet see. That's when Jake realized something that sent a chill down his spine. Durrani wanted to be captured. This whole situation, the trap, the firefight, it was all orchestrated. But why? What was the Taliban commander really after? Jake didn't have time to figure it out. Another RPG hit the building, this time taking out part of the roof. Debris rained down, and Jake heard Tyler cry out. He rushed over to find the young SEAL pinned under a fallen beam, blood streaming down his face. I'm okay, Tyler insisted, though his voice was strained with pain. Jake and Anthony lifted the beam off him. Tyler's left arm looked broken, but he was alive. Jake helped him to a more protected corner and radioed David. "We've got a casualty. Bennett's arm is broken, possible concussion. We need that bird here now." 7 minutes. Jake returned to his position and continued fighting. His rifle ran dry, and he smoothly transitioned to his sidearm. Each shot was deliberate, controlled. This was what he'd trained for his entire adult life. Then, finally, he heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the rhythmic thump of helicopter rotors cutting through the night air. "Extract is inbound. Prep for hot load," Marcus shouted. The Black Hawk descended into the compound's courtyard, its door gunners laying down suppressive fire. The team moved as one, carrying Tyler between them while Jake kept Durrani under control. As they ran toward the helicopter, insurgents made one final desperate push. Bullets pinged off the Black Hawk's armored hull. Jake was the last to board, practically throwing Durrani into the cabin before leaping in himself. "Go, go, go." He shouted to the pilots. The helicopter lifted off, and Jake watched the compound shrink below them. They'd made it out. Against impossible odds, they'd completed the mission. Durrani was captured, and all his men were still breathing. But as Jake looked at the Taliban commander sitting calmly despite the zip ties binding his wrists, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Durrani's slight smile suggested this wasn't a victory for the SEALs at all. It was only the beginning of something much more dangerous. The Black Hawk touched down at forward. operating Base Chapman just as the sun began to rise over the Afghan mountains. Jake's team had been silent during the 20-minute flight, each man processing what had just happened. Tyler sat with his back against the cabin wall, his broken arm wrapped in a temporary splint. His face was pale, but his eyes remained alert. Jake kept his attention on Durrani throughout the flight. The Taliban commander hadn't said a word since they'd loaded him onto the helicopter. He simply stared out the open door at the landscape passing below, that same unsettling smile playing at the corners of his mouth as soon as the helicopter's wheels touched ground. A medical team rushed forward with a stretcher for Tyler. He tried to wave them off, but Jake put a firm hand on his shoulder. "Let them check you out, Bennett." "That's an order," Jake said. Tyler nodded reluctantly and allowed himself to be led toward the base hospital. The rest of the team secured Durrani and escorted him toward the detention facility, a reinforced concrete building on the far side of the base. Commander Robert Hayes was waiting for them outside the facility. He was a career Navy officer with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Jake had served under Hayes for 3 years and respected him more than any officer he'd ever known. "Lieutenant Morrison, good work out there." "I heard it got hot," Hayes said, extending his hand. Jake shook it firmly. "Yes, sir. Heavier resistance than intelligence predicted. But we got the target." Hayes looked past Jake at Durrani, who was being led inside by 2 armed guards. "So that's him, Rashid Durrani. He doesn't look like much, does he?" "Looks can be deceiving, sir," Jake replied. "There's something off about this whole operation. He wasn't trying to escape. It's like he wanted us to capture him." Hayes frowned. "Explain." Jake recounted everything that had happened during the mission, including Durrani's cryptic comments about information being in a place only he could access. Hayes listened intently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. "This complicates things," Hayes said when Jake finished. "Command is sending an interrogation team. They should arrive within the hour. Until then, Durrani stays in isolation. No contact with anyone except guards." "Sir, I'd like to be present during the interrogation," Jake said. Hayes studied him for a moment. "Why?" "Your job was capture, not extraction of intelligence." "Because I don't trust him, sir. And I have a feeling whatever he's planning involves more than just our intelligence-gathering efforts." Hayes considered this, then nodded. "All right, Lieutenant. You've earned that right. Get some food, clean up, and meet me in the interrogation room at 0800 hours. Jake checked his watch. That gave him 90 minutes. He headed to the mess hall, where he found Marcus and Luis already eating breakfast. They looked exhausted but uninjured. "How's Bennett?" Marcus asked as Jake sat down with a tray of scrambled eggs and coffee. "Broken arm, concussion, but he'll be fine." "Doc says he'll be back on duty in 6 weeks," Jake replied. Luis shook his head. "Kid did good out there. Didn't panic, kept his head straight. Most guys would have folded." "He's a SEAL," Jake said simply. "That's what we do." They ate in silence for a few minutes before Marcus spoke again. "What do you think Durrani meant about the information being somewhere only he can access?" "I don't know," Jake admitted. "But I'm about to find out. I'll be sitting in on the interrogation." Marcus raised his eyebrows. "You think Command will get anything out of him?" "If anyone can, it's them. But something tells me Durrani's going to play games. Guys like him always do." After finishing breakfast, Jake returned to his quarters for a quick shower and change of clothes. The hot water felt incredible after hours in the field, washing away the dust and sweat. But it couldn't wash away the nagging feeling in his gut that this mission was far from over. At precisely 0800 hours, Jake entered the interrogation facility. Commander Hayes was already there, along with 2 people Jake didn't recognize. One was a woman in her mid-40s, wearing civilian clothes, with sharp features and intelligent gray eyes. The other was a younger man, maybe 30, built like a weightlifter and carrying himself with the controlled aggression of someone who'd seen combat. Lieutenant Morrison. "This is Sarah Chen from the CIA Special Activities Division, and Jason Torres, formerly Delta Force." Now a contractor with sad Hayes introduced them. Jake shook their hands. Sarah's grip was firm and businesslike. Jason's was just short of painful, a not-so-subtle display of dominance that Jake ignored. "Pleasure," Sarah said. "Commander Hayes has briefed us on your mission. Impressive work getting Durrani out of that situation." "Thank you, ma'am," Jake replied. "Let's get started," Hayes said, leading them into an adjacent room through a one-way mirror. Jake could see Durrani sitting at a metal table, his hands cuffed to a bolt in the center. The room was bare, except for the table and 2 chairs. Durrani looked completely relaxed, as if he were waiting for tea rather than an interrogation. Sarah picked up a microphone, connected to speakers in the interrogation room. "Mr. Durrani, I'm going to give you one chance to cooperate voluntarily. Tell us about the planned attack on Kabul, and your treatment here will reflect that cooperation." Durrani looked directly at the mirror, as if he could see through it. "I will speak only to Lieutenant Morrison." Everyone in the observation room turned to look at Jake. He felt a chill run down his spine. "How does he know my name?" Jake asked. Sarah checked her notes. "You never identified yourself during the mission?" "No, we use call signs in the field, not real names." "And he did his homework," Jason said grimly. "He knew we were coming, and he knew who would be leading the team." Hayes looked at Jake. "This is your call, Lieutenant. You don't have to go in there." Jake stared at Durrani through the glass. Every instinct told him this was a trap of some kind. But if Durrani would only talk to him, they had no choice. "I'll do it," Jake said. Sarah put a hand on his arm. "Be careful. Men like Durrani are master manipulators. Don't let him get into your head." Jake nodded and entered the interrogation room. Durrani's eyes lit up as he walked in. "Lieutenant Morrison, please sit," Durrani said, as if he were the host rather than the prisoner. Jake remained standing. "You wanted to talk to me?" "So talk," Durrani smiled. "Direct. I appreciate that. Americans waste so much time with pleasantries. Let me be equally direct. The information you seek about the Kabul attack, I will give it to you. But not here? Then where?" "There is a location, 3 days' journey from here. In the mountains near the Pakistani border. That is where you will find what you need." Jake crossed his arms. "Why would we believe you? This could be another ambush." "Could be," Durrani agreed. "But it is not. Think, Lieutenant. If I wanted you dead, you would have died in that village. I had 50 men surrounding you. Instead, I allowed you to escape with only minor casualties." Loud. Jake's voice was hard. "We fought our way out. You fought admirably. But you fought against men I specifically instructed to contain you, not kill you. If I had given the order, none of you would have reached that helicopter." Jake wanted to argue, but something in Durrani's tone made him pause. Could it be true? Had the Taliban commander really been controlling the intensity of that firefight? "Why?" Jake asked. "Why help us?" Durrani leaned forward as much as his restraints would allow. "Because the men planning the Kabul attack are not my allies. They are extremists, even by Taliban standards. They plan to kill thousands, including many Muslims, women, children. I am a fighter, Lieutenant, but I am not a butcher of innocence. You expect me to believe you suddenly grew a conscience? I expect you to believe I am pragmatic. The attack these men plan will bring the full weight of American military power down on Afghanistan. It will destroy everything the Taliban has worked to build. I am willing to stop them, but only if it benefits me." "What do you want?" Jake asked. "Safe passage to Qatar. A new identity. Money to start a new life away from this war." Jake laughed bitterly. "You want us to give you a free pass after everything you've done? I want to survive just as you do. And I am offering you the only way to stop an attack that will make September 11th look small. The choice is yours, Lieutenant." Jake turned and walked out of the interrogation room, his mind racing. The others were waiting in the observation room. "Well," Hayes asked. "He wants a deal. Safe passage and relocation in exchange for leading us to the location where we'll find information about the attack," Jake explained. Sarah shook her head. "Absolutely not. We don't negotiate with terrorists. What if he's telling the truth?" Jake countered. "What if there really is an attack being planned and we ignore it because of pride?" "We can't trust him," Jason argued. "This is textbook insurgent tactics. He lures us into the mountains, and we walk into a trap with our eyes wide open. Hayes was quiet, thinking. Finally, he spoke. We need more information. Sarah, contact your analysts. See if there's any chatter about a major attack. If Durrani's story checks out, we'll consider his offer. Over the next 6 hours, intelligence flooded in from every available source. Satellite imagery showed unusual troop movements in the region Durrani had mentioned. Intercepted communications suggested something big was being planned, though details were scarce. Most convincingly, an undercover CIA asset in Pakistan confirmed hearing rumors of a spectacular attack on Kabul within the next 2 weeks. By evening, Commander Hayes made his decision. We're going. But on our terms, not Durrani's. The plan was formed. Jake would lead a larger team, 12 SEALs instead of 6, plus Jason Torres and 2 other CIA contractors. They would take Durrani into the mountains, following his directions, but maintaining complete control over the situation. At the first sign of betrayal, they would abort, and Durrani would spend the rest of his life in a prison cell. Jake briefed his team that night. Marcus was second in command again, with Luis, David, and Anthony filling out the original squad. 6 new SEALs joined them, all experienced operators Jake had worked with before. Tyler, still recovering from his injuries, would have to sit this one out, though Jake could see how much it frustrated him. This is a high-risk operation, Jake told his assembled team. We're going into hostile territory with a prisoner who may be leading us into an ambush. Stay alert. Trust your training. And most importantly, trust each other. They departed before dawn, a convoy of 3 armored vehicles moving through the Afghan countryside. Durrani sat in the middle vehicle with Jake, his hands cuffed, but his manner still unnervingly calm. The journey was brutal. The roads became worse as they climbed into the mountains, eventually disappearing entirely. They had to proceed on foot, carrying heavy packs through treacherous terrain. Jake kept 2 men on Durrani at all times, while the others maintained a defensive perimeter. On the second day, they encountered a Taliban checkpoint. 5 armed men blocked the narrow mountain pass. Jake's hand moved to his rifle, but Durrani called out in Pashto. The guards immediately lowered their weapons and stepped aside. What did you say to them? Jake demanded. I told them we were on important business and not to interfere, Durrani replied. See, Lieutenant, I am keeping my word. But that night, as the team made camp in a rocky ravine, things took a dark turn. One of the perimeter guards, Petty Officer James Wilson, disappeared during his watch. They found him an hour later, throat cut, his body hidden behind a boulder. The team went on high alert. Someone had infiltrated their position without being detected. That took serious skill and knowledge of their movements. This doesn't make sense, Marcus said quietly to Jake. If Durrani set us up, why kill just one man? Why not attack the whole group? Jake looked at Durrani, who seemed genuinely surprised by Wilson's death. Either he was an incredible actor, or he really hadn't known this would happen. Someone else is out here, Jake realized. Someone who doesn't want us reaching that location? Durrani nodded slowly. The men planning the attack, they must have learned of my capture. They know I would betray them to save myself. How many? Jake asked. I do not know. But they are well-trained. Former ISI Pakistani intelligence. Some of the most dangerous operatives in this region. Jake made a quick decision. We continue. But we move faster and sleep less. If they want to stop us, they'll have to catch us first. The third day was a nightmare march through steep mountain passes and frozen streams. Everyone was exhausted, running on adrenaline and determination, but they made good progress, covering in one day what should have taken 2. That evening, as the sun set behind jagged peaks, Durrani pointed to a cave entrance partially hidden by rocks and scrub brush. There, he said, inside that cave, you will find what you seek.
Ow.
Jake studied the entrance. It was a perfect ambush point. Dark, confined, easy to defend. If hostiles were waiting inside, his team would be slaughtered. Jason, take 4 men and sweep the entrance. Use thermal imaging, Jake ordered. The contractors moved forward carefully, scanning the cave with handheld thermal cameras. After 10 tense minutes, Jason returned. It's clear. No heat signatures, but there's something in there. Looks like a cache of some kind. Jake took half the team inside, leaving the others to guard Durrani and watch for threats. The cave was deeper than it appeared from outside, stretching back 50 meters into the mountain. At the far end, illuminated by their flashlights, was a small chamber. And inside that chamber was something that made Jake's blood run cold. Detailed maps of cobble, building schematics, guard rotation schedules. And most damning of all, photographs of what appeared to be a massive truck bomb under construction. "My God," Marcus whispered. "They're planning something huge." But there was more. A laptop computer sat on a natural stone shelf, somehow powered and waiting. Jake opened it to find dozens of files containing names, dates, and tactical plans. This wasn't just information about one attack. It was a comprehensive network of insurgent operations across the entire region. "We need to get this back to command immediately," Jake said. As they prepared to secure the laptop and documents, gunfire erupted outside the cave. Jake and his team rushed toward the entrance to find the remaining SEALs under heavy attack. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkening mountainside as dozens of hostile fighters poured fire into their position. Jake's worst fears had come true. They'd found the intelligence. But now they were trapped with enemies on all sides and no way to call for extraction in these mountains. The mission had just become a fight for survival, and this time there would be no helicopter rescue coming to save them. Bullets ricocheted off the cave walls as Jake and his team pressed themselves against the rough stone. Outside, the firefight intensified. Jake could hear Marcus shouting orders, trying to organize a defense against the surprise attack. The SEALs who had remained outside were outnumbered and caught in a terrible position. Jake made a split-second assessment. They had two choices: stay in the cave and hope to outlast the attackers, or push through and try to break the enemy's position. Staying put meant becoming trapped. If the attackers had any kind of explosives, they could seal the cave entrance and bury them alive. You push through, stay tight, cover each other, and move fast, Jake commanded. His team formed up and rushed toward the entrance, weapons raised. As soon as they cleared the cave mouth, Jake's training took over. His eyes tracked multiple targets moving through the rocks above their position. These weren't local militia. Their movements were professional, disciplined. Durrani had been right about former intelligence operatives hunting them. Jake dropped to one knee and fired 3 quick bursts, hitting a fighter who had been positioning himself for a flanking attack. To his left, David provided covering fire while Luis and Anthony moved to reinforce Marcus's position. Casualties. Jake shouted over the gunfire. Peterson took one in the leg. "He's still fighting," Marcus called back. Jake spotted Petty Officer Kevin Peterson crouched behind a boulder.
Oh.
Blood staining his pants, but his rifle still steady in his hands. That was the SEAL way. You fought until you physically couldn't anymore. Jason Torres appeared at Jake's side, his rifle barking as he engaged targets uphill. "We need to move to higher ground. We're sitting ducks down here." Jake knew he was right. The enemy had the tactical advantage, firing down on them from elevated positions. But climbing up meant exposing themselves even more. "Where's Durrani?" Jake suddenly asked, realizing he hadn't seen the Taliban commander since the fighting started. "Still secured with Richards and Hall," Marcus responded. Pointing to a defensive position 20 meters away, Jake could see 2 SEALs protecting Durrani, who was lying flat on the ground with his hands still cuffed. At least he wasn't going anywhere. An explosion rocked the mountainside as a rocket-propelled grenade streaked past, missing them by mere feet. The blast sent rocks and debris flying, and Jake felt shrapnel tear through his left shoulder. Pain blazed through him, but he forced it down, focusing on the immediate threat. RPG. Northeast position. Jake yelled. 2 of his SEALs immediately directed fire toward the RPG team. One of the enemy fighters fell, but another grabbed the launcher and prepared to fire again. Jake lined up his shot, controlled his breathing despite the chaos, and squeezed the trigger. The fighter dropped before he could launch the second rocket.
"Ah! We need to call for support,"
David shouted, working the satellite phone despite the incoming fire. "Are you kidding? In these mountains? No aircraft can reach us." Luis shot back. David ignored him, speaking rapidly into the phone. Jake couldn't hear what he was saying over the noise of battle, but he saw David's face fall as whoever was on the other end gave him bad news. Eamon says closest air support is 40 minutes out, and they can't guarantee they can reach us in this terrain. David reported. 40 minutes. Jake looked around at his team. They were holding their own, but ammunition wouldn't last forever, and he could see more enemy fighters moving into position on the ridgeline above them. That's when Durrani called out, his voice somehow carrying over the gunfire. "Lieutenant Morrison, I can help." Jake's first instinct was to ignore him, but desperation made him listen. He low-crawled to where Durrani lay between Richards and Hall. Jake demanded. "There is a path behind that large rock formation to your right. It leads up and around, comes out above where those fighters are positioned. If you can reach it, you can flank them," Durrani said quickly. "Why would you help us?" "Because if you die, I die. And I very much wish to live," Durrani replied with brutal honesty. Jake studied the rock formation. It was possible there was a path there. The question was whether Durrani was telling the truth or leading them into an even worse position. "Marcus, Torres, on me," Jake called out. When they reached him, Jake explained Durrani's suggestion. Marcus looked skeptical, but Jason studied the terrain and slowly nodded. "Could work." "It's risky, but staying here is riskier," Jason said. Jake made his decision. "Marcus, you take command of the main group. Hold this position and keep them busy. Jason, you're with me. We take 4 men and try to flank them using that path. If we can hit them from 2 directions, we might break their assault." Marcus didn't like it, but he understood the tactics. "Don't get yourself killed, Lieutenant." Jake selected 4 of his best shooters, David Park, Anthony Rivers, and 2 of the newer SEALs, petty officers Mike Chen and Rafael Garcia. They waited for a lull in the enemy fire, then sprinted toward the rock formation. Bullets chased them, kicking up dirt and stone chips, but they all made it to cover. Behind the rocks, Jake found what Durrani had described, a narrow path, barely wide enough for 1 man, winding up the mountainside, single file. "Stay low. If this is a trap, we're dead anyway," Jake said grimly. They climbed in silence, weapons ready, every sense alert for an ambush. The path was treacherous, with loose stones that could give away their position. Jake's wounded shoulder screamed with every movement, but he pushed through the pain. After 10 agonizing minutes, they reached a ledge that overlooked the enemy positions. Jake could see at least 15 fighters spread out among the rocks, all focused on the SEALs below. They had no idea Jake's team was above and behind them. Jake signaled his plan using hand gestures. They would hit the enemy from the rear in a coordinated strike, taking out as many as possible in the first seconds. Surprise was everything. On Jake's mark, they opened fire. The effect was devastating. Enemy fighters dropped before they could react. The ones who survived spun around in confusion, trying to locate this new threat while still defending against Marcus's team below. They were caught in a perfect crossfire. But these weren't amateurs. They adapted quickly, splitting their forces to engage both positions. What had been a tactical advantage became a fierce close-quarters battle. Jake found himself face-to-face with a fighter who emerged from behind a boulder, swinging a rifle like a club. Jake blocked the strike with his own weapon and drove his elbow into the man's face. The fighter stumbled back, and Jake finished him with 2 shots to the chest. To his right, David was grappling with another enemy, their struggle taking them dangerously close to the ledge's edge. Jake couldn't get a clear shot without risking hitting David. Then, Anthony appeared, delivering a brutal kick that sent the enemy fighter tumbling over the cliff. The firefight lasted another 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. When the last enemy fighter fell, an eerie silence settled over the mountain. Jake's ears rang from the gunfire. His shoulder was bleeding freely now, and he could feel blood soaking through his uniform. Sound off. Jake called to his team. They were all alive, though Mike Chen had taken a bullet through his vest that had bruised his ribs badly. "It could have been so much worse," Jake radioed Marcus. "Alpha 2, this is Alpha 1. Enemy position, Neutralized. What's your status? Alpha 1. We're secure. 3 wounded, none critical. Whatever you did up there, it worked. Jake led his team back down the path, moving carefully in case any enemy fighters remained hidden. When they reunited with the main group, Jake did a quick head count. All 13 of his people were still breathing. Peterson's leg wound was serious, but not life-threatening. Jake's shoulder needed attention, but could wait. And Durrani sat exactly where they'd left him. Watching everything with those calculating eyes, Jake approached him. Your path worked. We're not dead. Tenant, I want to survive. Helping you helps me, Durrani said. Who were those fighters? Men loyal to Commander Aziz. He is the one planning the Kabul attack. I told you he would try to stop us. Jake pulled Durrani to his feet. We need to move. If Aziz knows we're here, he might send reinforcements. David appeared with the satellite phone. Lieutenant, I've got command. They want to talk to you. Jake took the phone and stepped away. Commander Hayes' voice came through, tight with concern. Morrison, report. We secured the intelligence, sir. It's even bigger than we thought. Complete plans for multiple attacks, not just Kabul. Network diagrams, financial records, everything. But we got hit hard by hostile forces. 13 men wounded, 1 killed earlier. We need extraction, but we're deep in the mountains. Understood. I'm authorizing a special extraction team. They'll reach you by dawn tomorrow. Can you hold out until then? Jake looked at his exhausted team, at the limited ammunition they had left, at the darkening sky. We don't have a choice, sir. There's something else, Hayes said. We've been analyzing the intelligence you found. Durrani wasn't lying. There's an attack planned for 6 days from now. A coordinated strike on 3 locations in Kabul, including the U.S. Embassy. If successful, casualties could be in the thousands. Jake felt the weight of that information settle on his shoulders. What do you need from us? Get that intelligence back here safely. Everything else is secondary. Durrani included. Jake understood the implication. If it came down to saving the intelligence or saving Durrani, the intelligence took priority. Yes, sir. As night fell, Jake's team found a more defensible position higher up the mountain. They posted guards in shifts, tended to wounds, and tried to rest. Jake sat apart from the others, organizing the documents and laptop they'd recovered from the cave. The scope of what they'd found was staggering. Commander Aziz wasn't just planning an attack on Kabul. He had connections to extremist groups across 4 countries. Financial records showed money flowing from sources in Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and even some European accounts. This was bigger than the Taliban. It was an international terrorist network. Marcus sat down next to him, offering a canteen of water. Jake drank gratefully. How's the shoulder? Marcus asked. Hurts like hell, but I'll live. How are the others? Tired, scared. But they're SEALs. They'll keep fighting as long as you need them to? Jake smiled slightly. That's what I'm afraid of. Sometimes I wonder if we pushed too hard, kept us alive today. That's what matters. They sat in silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. In the distance, Jake could hear wolves howling. Or maybe they were wild dogs. Either way, it was a reminder that they were far from civilization, far from safety. Durrani's voice interrupted his thoughts. You were thinking about trust, Lieutenant. Jake turned to see the Taliban commander had moved closer, still under guard, but apparently wanting to talk. What makes you say that? Because I'm thinking about it as well. You do not trust me. I do not trust you. Yet here we are, dependent on each other for survival. It is an interesting situation. I don't need philosophy right now, Jake said coldly. Perhaps not. But you need information. And I have more to tell you about Commander Aziz. Jake's attention sharpened. I'm listening. Aziz is not just a military commander. He is a true believer, a zealot, who sees this war as holy. Men like me, we fight for practical reasons. Power, money, survival. But men like Aziz fight because they believe God commands it. That makes them far more dangerous. Why are you really telling us all this? Durrani was quiet for a moment. Because I have seen what men like Aziz do. I have seen them kill women and children without hesitation, claiming it serves a higher purpose. I am a fighter, Lieutenant, but I am not a monster. If stopping Aziz means helping you, then that is what I will do. Jake wanted to believe him. It would be easier if Durrani was simply evil, an enemy to be defeated. But the reality was more complex. Durrani was a man making calculations, trying to survive in a brutal world. If you're lying, if this is some elaborate trap, I will personally make sure you spend the rest of your life in the worst prison we have, Jake said. I understand. And if I am telling the truth, you will honor your agreement to relocate me safely. Jake nodded slowly. If command approves it, I can't make that promise alone. That is honest. I appreciate honesty, Lieutenant. The night passed slowly. Jake dozed fitfully, his wounded shoulder making comfortable sleep impossible. Every hour, they rotated guards, maintaining vigilance against another attack. But none came. Perhaps they'd hurt Aziz's forces badly enough to make them cautious. As dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Jake heard the distinctive sound of helicopter rotors. Not just one, but multiple aircraft approaching their position. Extraction incoming. Prepare to move, Jake ordered. 2 Black Hawks appeared over the ridge, escorted by 2 Apache attack helicopters. It was the most beautiful sight Jake had seen in days. The Black Hawks landed in a clearing 50 meters from their position, and Jake's team moved quickly, carrying their wounded and the precious intelligence. As Jake helped Peterson onto the first helicopter, he looked back at the mountain cave where they'd found the intelligence. Men had died here. Others had been wounded, but they'd accomplished their mission. Durrani was loaded onto the second helicopter under heavy guard. As Jake climbed in after him, the Taliban commander caught his eye. The hard part is not over, Lieutenant. Getting the intelligence was one thing. Using it to stop Aziz will be much harder. Jake settled into his seat as the helicopter lifted off. Durrani was right. They had the intelligence, but now they had to stop an attack in less than 6 days. And somewhere in Afghanistan, Commander Aziz was still free, still planning, still dangerous. The mission was far from over. In many ways, it was just beginning. The helicopters touched down at Bagram Airfield just after noon. Jake's team was immediately rushed to the base hospital where doctors treated their wounds. Jake's shoulder required 12 stitches and would be sore for weeks, but the damage was superficial. Peterson needed surgery on his leg, but would make a full recovery. All things considered, they'd been incredibly lucky. While the medical staff worked on his team, Jake was summoned to a secure briefing room. The laptop and documents they'd recovered had already been analyzed by intelligence specialists. Commander Hayes was there, along with Sarah Chen and a group of high-ranking officers Jake didn't recognize. Lieutenant Morrison. Please sit, a colonel said, gesturing to a chair. Jake sat. Still wearing his blood-stained uniform, he hadn't slept in over 30 hours, and exhaustion was catching up with him. The colonel activated a screen on the wall showing photographs and diagrams. Thanks to your team's work, we now have a complete picture of Commander Aziz's network. He's been planning this attack for 8 months, coordinating with extremist cells in Pakistan and funding it through a series of complex financial transactions. Sarah took over the briefing. The attack is scheduled for 0900 hours, 5 days from now. 3 simultaneous truck bombs at the U.S. Embassy, the Presidential Palace, and the International Security Assistance Force headquarters. Combined casualties could exceed 2,000 people. Jake felt sick. 2,000 lives hanging in the balance. What's the plan to stop it? He asked. The colonel looked uncomfortable. That's complicated. We know where Aziz is hiding, a compound in the mountains, near the Pakistani border. But it's heavily fortified with possibly 50 fighters. A conventional assault would alert him, and he'd disappear across the border into Pakistan where we can't follow. And what are we doing? Sarah answered. We're considering a targeted drone strike. Take out Aziz and his leadership in one decisive action. Without him, the attack network should collapse. Jake shook his head. Except the trucks are already built. The drivers are already recruited. Killing Aziz won't stop bombs that are already in motion. Which is why we need more intelligence, Hayes said. We need to know exactly where those trucks are, who the drivers are, and when they plan to move into the city. That's information only someone inside Aziz's inner circle would have. Jake suddenly understood where this was going. You want to use Durrani? Claims he can get us inside Aziz's compound, Sarah confirmed. Durrani was part of the Taliban's intelligence apparatus. He knows how to move through their networks without raising suspicion. If he can get close enough to Aziz, he might be able to find out the final details we need. You want to send him back? After everything we went through to capture him? Jake asked incredulously. The colonel leaned forward. We're not sending him alone. You and your team would go with him, covertly. Durrani provides the cover story. You provide the security and extraction capability. It's a joint operation. Jake stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. With all due respect, sir, this is insane. Durrani could turn on us the moment we're inside that compound. We'd be outnumbered 50-1 with no backup. Which is why it's a volunteer mission, Hayes said quietly. I won't order you or your men into this. But, Lieutenant, if we don't stop these attacks, thousands of innocent people will die. Jake wanted to refuse. He wanted to tell them to find another way. But as he looked at the photographs on the screen showing the 3 target locations, showing the crowds of people who had no idea they were in danger, he knew he couldn't walk away. I need to talk to my team, Jake said. Of course. You have 2 hours to decide, the colonel replied. Jake left the briefing room and headed straight for the hospital. His team was spread across several rooms, being treated and resting. He gathered them together in a common area, those who could walk joining him, while others listened from their beds. When he finished explaining the mission, silence filled the room. Marcus was the first to speak. They're asking us to walk into hell. Again. I know, Jake said. That's why I'm not asking any of you to volunteer. You've all done more than enough. Anthony spoke up from his bed, his arm in a sling. How many people are in those buildings they're targeting? Intelligence estimates around 2,000 at that time of day, Jake replied. Anthony nodded slowly. Then we go. We don't have a choice. I'm in, Luis said immediately. One by one, every member of Jake's team volunteered. Even Peterson, lying in bed with his leg in a cast, insisted he'd go if they'd let him. Jake felt a surge of pride mixed with fear for what they were about to attempt. Then we do this right. We plan every detail. We prepare for every contingency. And we don't take unnecessary risks. Understood? They spent the next 24 hours planning. Durrani would pose as an escaped prisoner who had information about American operations. It was plausible enough that Aziz might grant him an audience. Jake and Faseels would pose as Pakistani Taliban fighters who had helped Durrani escape. They'd wear local clothes, grow out their beards as much as possible in one day, and rely on Durrani to do most of the talking. The risky part was weapons. They couldn't go in unarmed, but carrying American equipment would give them away instantly. Sarah Chen arranged for them to carry AK-47s and other weapons common in the region. Jake hated the feel of the unfamiliar rifle, but he practiced until he could operate it smoothly. On the second day, they flew to a remote staging area, just 10 kilometers from Aziz's compound. Jake brought Marcus, Luis, David, and Anthony. Jason Torres and 2 other CIA contractors would provide sniper cover from a distant ridge, ready to create a distraction if things went wrong. They moved on foot through the mountains, arriving at the compound just as the sun set. The place was exactly as intelligence had described, a large fortified structure surrounded by high walls, with armed guards patrolling the perimeter. Durrani led them to the main gate and called out in Pashto. A guard appeared, rifle ready, and challenged them. Durrani spoke rapidly, gesturing at Jake and his team. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he kept his expression neutral, trying to look like a hardened fighter rather than a terrified seal out of his depth. The guard disappeared inside. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Jake's hand rested on his rifle, ready to fight their way out if this went wrong. Finally, the gate opened. A man in traditional Afghan clothing emerged, flanked by 4 guards. He studied Durrani with cold eyes. "Rashid Durrani, we heard you had been captured by the Americans. Yet here you are," the man said in accented English, clearly for Jake's benefit. "I escaped with the help of these Pakistani brothers. We killed 3 American soldiers in the process," Durrani lied smoothly. The man's eyes moved to Jake. "You are Pakistani?" Jake nodded, trusting Durrani's cover story. He said nothing, knowing his American accent would give him away instantly. "You do not speak?" The man pressed. "He was injured in the fighting. His jaw was broken," Durrani interjected quickly. "But he can still shoot, as the Americans learned." The man seemed to accept this. "Come. Commander Aziz will want to hear your story." They were led inside the compound. Jake's eyes tracked everything: the number of guards, the layout of buildings, possible escape routes. His team did the same, their training taking over despite the danger. Commander Aziz was exactly as Jake had imagined: tall, thin, with burning eyes that showed absolute conviction. He sat on cushions in a large room surrounded by maps and documents. Jake recognized some of the maps from the intelligence they'd captured. Aziz greeted Durrani warmly, embracing him like an old friend. They spoke in Pashto for several minutes, while Jake and his team stood silently, trying to appear uninterested. Jake caught glimpses of the documents spread around the room. One showed a detailed map of Kabul with 3 locations marked in red. After the initial greetings, Aziz switched to English. "Rashid tells me you helped him escape. For this, you have my gratitude. But I must know why help him." "What do you gain?" Durrani answered before Jake had to. "They seek revenge against the Americans. Their village was destroyed by a drone strike. Women and children killed. They came to Afghanistan to join the true fight." Aziz nodded approvingly. "Good. We can always use more fighters. Especially now with our greatest operation approaching." "The attack on Kabul?" Durrani asked casually. Aziz smiled. "You have been away from the cause for too long, my friend. We have refined the plan. 3 trucks, as you know, but we have added a 4th target, the British Embassy, and we have moved the timeline up. The attack happens tomorrow at dawn." Jake's blood went cold. Tomorrow, not 5 days from now. They had less than 12 hours to stop for truck bombs. Durrani maintained his composure. A wise decision. The Americans will not expect it so soon. "Where are the trucks now?" "Safe in locations throughout the city. The drivers are in place. By this time tomorrow, the world will know our power," Aziz said with chilling certainty. Jake needed to get this information out immediately, but they were surrounded by armed fighters. Any attempt to use a radio or satellite phone would result in their immediate execution. As if reading his thoughts, Aziz turned to Jake's team. "You will stay here tonight as my guests. Tomorrow, after the attack succeeds, we will celebrate together." It wasn't a request. Guards moved to escort them to a separate building. Jake and his team had no choice but to follow. Once they were alone in a small room, Marcus whispered urgently, "We need to contact command. We have maybe 10 hours before those trucks move." "I know," Jake said quietly, checking the room for listening devices. He found 2 small microphones hidden in the walls. They were being monitored. Jake gestured to his team, using hand signals they'd practiced. They understood immediately. Stay quiet. Wait for an opportunity. Hours passed. Guards brought them food and water, but stayed watchful. Jake's mind raced through scenarios, looking for any way to alert command or stop the attack themselves. But they were deep inside enemy territory with minimal weapons and no backup. Around midnight, the compound went quiet. Most of the fighters were sleeping, with only perimeter guards remaining alert. Jake made his decision. Using hand signals, he instructed his team to prepare for action. They would overpower their guards, get to a high point in the compound, and use their emergency beacon to alert the sniper team on the ridge. It was desperate and risky, but doing nothing meant for truck bombs would detonate in Kabul in less than 6 hours. Marcus quietly disabled the listening devices. Luis and Anthony positioned themselves by the door. David prepared their emergency radio. Jake took a deep breath and nodded. Anthony suddenly collapsed, pretending to have a seizure. He thrashed on the floor, making choking sounds. It was disturbingly realistic. Within seconds, 2 guards burst into the room to investigate. Jake and Marcus moved simultaneously. Jake struck the first guard in the throat, crushing his windpipe before he could shout. Marcus drove his knife into the second guard's kidney, then covered his mouth as he fell. Both guards were neutralized in less than 5 seconds, completely silent. They dragged the bodies inside and stripped them of their weapons and radios. Now they were armed with AK-47s and had communication devices that might help them move through the compound. "We need to reach the roof of the main building. David, get that beacon ready." "Luis, Anthony, you're with me?" "Marcus, cover our rear," Jake ordered in a whisper. They moved through the compound like shadows, using darkness and their training to avoid detection. Twice they encountered guards, and twice they eliminated them silently. Jake hated killing men who didn't even know they were under attack, but thousands of lives depended on their success. They reached the main building and climbed an external staircase to the roof. From this vantage point, Jake could see the entire compound and the mountains beyond. He activated the emergency beacon, a powerful signal that would alert Jason Torres and the sniper team. Within minutes, Jake's earpiece crackled to life with Jason's voice. "Alpha 1, we have your beacon. What's your status? We're compromised. Need immediate extraction and urgent communication with command. Aziz moved the attack to dawn today. Repeat. Attack is in 6 hours," Jake transmitted urgently. "Copy that. Stand by, Jake. New extraction wouldn't be quick." They were kilometers from any landing zone, and calling in helicopters would take time. Time they didn't have. That's when alarms began blaring throughout the compound. Their absence had been discovered. Lights flickered on, and Jake could see dozens of fighters emerging from buildings, searching for them. "We've got company," Marcus said grimly, raising his rifle. They had maybe 5 minutes before they were completely surrounded. Jake's mind raced through their options. They could try to fight their way out, but they'd never make it. They could barricade themselves on the roof and hope extraction arrived in time. Or, Jake looked at the main building beneath them. Aziz was down there, probably coordinating the search, and all his plans, all his communications with the truck bomb drivers, would be in that room where they'd first met him. "New plan," Jake said suddenly. "We capture Aziz. Use him as leverage to stop the trucks." His team looked at him like he'd lost his mind. But as they considered it, they realized it was their only option. Kill Aziz, and the trucks would still detonate. Capture him alive, and they might be able to force him to call off the attack. They descended from the roof and fought their way toward Aziz's command room. It was brutal close-quarters combat through narrow hallways. Luis took a bullet in his vest that knocked him down but didn't penetrate. Anthony killed 3 fighters with his knife when his rifle jammed. David provided covering fire while Marcus cleared rooms. Finally, they burst into Aziz's command room. The Taliban commander was there, along with 2 bodyguards and Durrani. For a split second, Jake wondered whose side Durrani would choose. Then Durrani moved. He grabbed one of the bodyguards from behind, giving Jake a clear shot at the other. Jake took it, then trained his rifle on Aziz. "Tell your men to stand down or you die right now," Jake said in English. Aziz stared at him with those burning eyes, showing no fear. "You are American soldiers. I knew there was something wrong with you. The trucks." "Call them off," Jake demanded. "Never. My death would be an honor. Those bombs will detonate whether I live or not." Jake grabbed Aziz by the throat. Then, you'll watch thousands of people die, knowing you could have stopped it. Outside, the sound of helicopter rotors filled the air. Not extraction. Apache attack helicopters providing air support. Jason Torres had come through, calling in the cavalry. Explosions rocked the compound as missiles struck the outer walls. Fighters scattered, caught between the American air assault and Jake's team holding their commander hostage. David was on the sat phone, speaking rapidly. "Command, we have Aziz. Alive. Tell him to call off the trucks, or we let the Apaches level this entire compound with him in it." A new voice came through the phone's speaker. A general Jake didn't recognize. "Commander Aziz, this is General Patterson. Stand down your operation immediately. We have authorization to eliminate this entire facility. You have 2 minutes to comply." Aziz looked at the phone, then at Jake, then at the ceiling as another missile struck nearby. For the first time, Jake saw uncertainty in his eyes. "If I call them off, what happens to me?" Aziz asked. "You stand trial for terrorism. But you live," Jake said. Aziz was silent for a long moment. Outside, the sounds of battle continued. Finally, he spoke. "Get me a phone. I will send the signal to abort." With shaking hands, Aziz sent encrypted messages to 4 different numbers. Within minutes, confirmation came back. All 4 trucks had received the abort signal. The drivers were standing down. Jake finally allowed himself to breathe. They'd done it. Against impossible odds, they'd stopped the attack. The extraction helicopters landed in the compound's courtyard 5 minutes later. Jake's team loaded Aziz and Durrani aboard and climbed in themselves. As they lifted off, Jake looked back at the smoking ruins of the compound. They'd accomplished their mission. 2 high-value targets captured. A massive terrorist attack prevented. And somehow, against all odds, his entire team was still alive. 2 weeks later, Jake stood in Commander Hayes' office, wearing his dress uniform. Hayes handed him a folder containing commendations for him and every member of his team. "You did exceptional work, Lieutenant." "The President himself signed off on these medals," Hayes said. "Thank you, sir. But it wasn't just us. Durrani came through when it mattered." Hayes nodded. "He's being processed for relocation to Qatar, as agreed. The CIA is debriefing him, but he'll get his new life. As for Aziz, he's already providing intelligence on other networks, and the 4 truck bombs? Safely disarmed. We recovered enough explosives to level several city blocks. You saved thousands of lives, Jake." Jake thought about Wilson, the seal they'd lost in the mountains. About Peterson's leg that would never be quite the same. About Tyler, still recovering from his injuries. The cost had been high. But when he thought about those 2,000 people who were alive today because of what his team had done, people who would never know how close they'd come to death, Jake knew it had been worth it. "What's next for us, sir?" Jake asked. Hayes smiled slightly. "Rest, recovery, and then, whenever you're ready, there's always another mission waiting." Jake nodded. There always was. That was the life of a Navy SEAL. Mission after mission. Risk after risk. Always standing between innocent people and those who would do them harm. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. And Jake wouldn't have it any other way. 6 months later, Jake received a letter. It had no return address, but he knew immediately who it was from. Inside was a single sentence in neat handwriting. "Thank you for keeping your word. A life for a life. We are even now. Stay safe, Lieutenant Morrison." It was unsigned, but Jake knew it was from Durrani, the Taliban commander who had been their prisoner, their guide, and ultimately, their unlikely ally. A man who had chosen survival over ideology, and in doing so, had helped save thousands of lives. Jake folded the letter and put it in his desk drawer. In this war, nothing was simple. Enemies could become allies. Allies could become enemies. The only constant was the mission and the men who stood beside you when everything went wrong. Jake picked up his phone and called Marcus. "You ready for another deployment?" Marcus laughed.
It's...
"Where are we going this time?" "Don't know yet. But wherever it is, I want the same team. The ones who walked through hell with me will be ready," Marcus promised. Jake hung up and looked out his window at the base, at the young SEALs training for their own missions. Their own moments when everything would depend on their courage and skill. He'd been where they were once, eager and untested. Now he was a veteran of some of the most dangerous operations the SEALs had ever conducted. He'd learned that capturing the enemy alive could be more valuable than killing them. He'd learned that trust could come from unexpected places. And he'd learned that the mission was never truly over. Because somewhere in the world, another threat was always emerging. But he'd also learned that when it mattered most, when lives hung in the balance, there was no better team on Earth than the Navy SEALs. They would go anywhere, face anything, and never quit until the mission was complete. That was the SEAL way. That was Jake's way. And as long as there were people who needed protecting, that would never change.